welcome. Thank you for being here. This is for APA, American Photographic Artists. It's NFT and the professional photographer. So our focus today is on copyright. Can't cover everything, so we're going to specialize in a specific area about NFTs. APA is a not-for-profit trade association. We focus on photographers who are professional photographers working in advertising, editorial, entertainment industry, commercial photographers. We are a photography association run by photographers who volunteer their time to run the association. And our mission is to advocate, elevate, and educate the professional photographic community. So thank you for being here. We exist through our membership, and I know that a number of members are supposed to be here today, so thank you to those members who are participating. If you're not a professional, if you're a professional photographer and not a member, I really encourage you to join, and I'm going to put a code in the chat that'll give you $20 off to join as a new member. We really want you to be part of the community. And as being part of the community, you can immediately start to get discounts with partners of ours and also on events that we have coming up and on competitions that we have. So you'll be able to save lots of money, but also it's just really important as APA has a community to have you as a member. So really encourage you to do that. Go to the APA national site with your code, use that to join, and then use that to see the events on the events page. This past year, a number of our members and board members have been starting to look into NFTs. We thought that this would be an important conversation to have. Our concern is always the safety and welfare and success of our members. So we wanted to invite people who could start to discuss this with you, how to protect your intellectual property, how to protect your copyright. I'm Juliette Wolf-Robin. I'm the National Executive Director of American Photographic Artists. And I'm interested in this subject, so I will be really interested to hear what everybody has to say. We'll be doing more of these. If NFTs are here to stay, then we will need to continue this conversation to hear what is happening next. We're not taking a particular position about NFTs. We're not promoting NFTs. Again, if you're going to create and sell them, we want you to have considered various aspects on how to protect yourself. And this conversation is going to be just an hour. We're going to be very respectful of that time and our speakers today. So it's going to go quickly. We have a great group of panelists today. I really want to thank them for being here. We have Stephen Doneger of Doneger Burrs. He's listed on California super lawyer list. I love saying that, so that's always my first thing. He's also APA's counsel on copyright matters. His firm is one of the preeminent firms in this country working on copyright cases and intellectual property disputes on behalf of photographers. And I will be adding to the APA website in our advocacy section a description of some of the different amicus briefs and cases he's been working on behalf of photographers. For those of you who want to learn more about some of the work that's happening on your behalf. You can also find on the APA website, if you look up copyright, there is a webinar that we did that Stephen Doneger and Jeff Sedlick did together about copyright registration and a bit of a how-to. So there's notes, it's written out, or you can watch it as a webinar, or you can read the notes on it. I would encourage you to do that. It's really a lot of helpful information. So thank you, Stephen, for being here. I've invited Joe Naylor from Image Rights. Image Rights is a service that tracks copyright usage on behalf of photographers. So you can check on unauthorized usage of your images through his service. His firm has helped photographers register more than 1 million images with the Copyright Office, and they've helped to recover tens of millions of dollars on behalf of photographers. Very important work. And so he's had experience in talking to photographers in regards to their concerns. Kristyna Archer is a professional photographer working in commercial advertising sector. She's been geeking out on the whole NFT thing, and I had a great conversation with her about it. So I was really happy that she agreed to be here today. She's an award-winning photographer working across multiple platforms of film, photography, stop motion, and design, with a passion for the visually compelling work through the lens of hyperrealism. If you haven't seen her work, go to her website and see what she is up to. Knowing that we have a wide range of photographers who are listening in today or in the future when we post this, I'll start with a high-level overview of the NFT space as I understand it, and then we'll dive in. So this will just take a couple of minutes. Maybe some of you know this, maybe it's all new. So NFT, the non-fungible token. So fungible is something such as an asset that you are able to replace or exchange or substitute with similar assets of the same value. So a $10 bill or 10 $1 bills would be fungible. A non-fungible cannot be traded exactly. So maybe a one-of-a-kind painting, real estate, or an NFT. The cryptocurrency that you need to create your NFT, buy an NFT, that is fungible. The art is non-fungible. The word token in NFT refers to the token being the voucher of your non-fungible asset. You tokenize the art in order to certify ownership. The blockchain is a public ledger. It's keeping track of the ownership, which may be public or private. This is the NFT network. And there's like 1,000 different blockchains, with the most popular for creators being Ethereum. So NFTs are typically created around art or music right now. There's some museums that have been creating them in a way to raise some money for to restore artwork, but there's also been a lot of controversy about that, about who the ownership of the art is, and also questions about the environmental impact. The NBA has released a series, and we're seeing other sports franchises use it. We're also seeing brands get into the space. There's a marketplace dedicated to limited edition spirits, where your proof of purchase of your NFT on the blockchain is how you redeem this limited edition bottle. So there's a lot of ways brands are going to start to use this new thing. As a professional commercial photographer, you currently sell a license to your work, or you sell the actual print. So you might decide that you want to get into the NFT space, and here's some quick overviews for you to consider. You're going to think about if you're going to sell this as a standalone, or is it part of a series? Is it an open edition, or is it scarce? The same way that you do your prints. Are you going to sell it in conjunction with a print? How do you want to describe it? You're going to think about your description before tell a story about it. And then you're going to need to spend some money to mint your NFT. So to do this, you're going to have to get into the cryptocurrency space, and you'll have an online wallet for your cryptocurrency, which might be MetaMask, Coinbase, Phantom, Glow, Rainbow, any of these companies. And then when you're ready to upload your photo to create an NFT, there's all the data that needs to be applied. So that's the minting of it. So you're going to upload to a blockchain, which is your ledger, and you'll put your NFT in a marketplace. And then each of these places where you might sell it have their own rules. So we're going to get into that. Some are invite only, some anybody can be a part of. There's OpenSea, Foundation, Super Rare, Bitsky, Marketplace. And all this encrypted information is what's taking power on computers and servers, and that energy is called gas. And there are gas fees for minting, and those fees fluctuate. And because it requires so much energy, there's talk about, is this bad for the environment? We're not really going to get into this today, but the things I've seen is that maybe to create an NFT, it's like 2 hours of powering your house, or 250 gallons of gas. If that's true, that seems like a lot, but we'll maybe look into that another day. You can set your price, but you're setting your price in crypto, which is another thing that we've seen fluctuate. Bitcoin has been worth 70,000 and now is like 19,000. Ethereum was about 5,000, is now under 1,400. So you're dealing in a world where the pricing can really change a lot, as opposed to when you're selling your services as a photographer or selling a print. there's a percentage of whatever you sell that goes to the marketplace that you're selling your NFT on. Generally speaking, you will get royalties if anybody resells your art. So there's money that you could make later on that. And then there's millions of NFTs. So you have to think about how you're going to get anybody to buy your particular one. These can be sold at auction. They can be sold on a marketplace. So the agreements that you're going to make, these are the smart contracts. And that's what I want to get into today is what you might need to know about the smart contracts that you make and who makes them. So Stephen, I'm going to start with you on that. Have you seen any smart contracts? Have you seen anything that stood out in regards to these contracts? Are they standard? Have they come to attorneys to have changes made? What is going on with those smart contracts?
What is going on with smart contracts? First of all, great introduction. Yes, we've reviewed some smart contracts. We've worked with some of our clients. Our firm is mostly a litigation firm, but we have one attorney who's solely transactional, and he's helped to get a couple of NFTs off the ground and going, and reviewed some smart contracts. I've taken a look. There are terms in them that are, I'm hesitant to say they're standard because that's not really true. And there's just an article not too long ago in Galaxy about what you're actually getting when you buy smart contracts and the variety of different contracts. And I've only taken a look at a handful of them. The contracts are generally created by the party offering the tokens for sale, and anyone can sort of do their own offer. And Juliet, you kind of walk through the steps of that, but the vast majority of offerings, come through a series of companies that help, launch. For example, Yerba Labs is a $4 billion behemoth that owns 63% of the implied market cap of the top 100 NFTs, which includes, CryptoPunks and the Bored Apes Yacht Club and some of the other ones that we've all heard about. And so they sort of have their sort of standard terms. But if you're not going through one of those companies and you're doing your own launch, then you would want to have someone create your contract for you, and the terms of those contracts can vary significantly.
Are there keywords or points in the contract that you've seen that you thought, oh, these are things people should really be paying attention?
Yeah, absolutely. The key terms, the key things to look out for, let's see, I think there's probably 4 things that are the most important. And the first is, who owns the copyright in the NFT? Most people assume that when they buy an NFT, they own the copyright. And in fact, when you look at some of the marketing materials around the NFTs, it suggests that, that the buyer would own the IP. Moonbirds, when they offered, they had put on their website, you own the IP, but in fact, you get into the license and you get into the terms and the owner doesn't. Under the Bored Apes Yacht Club, license, Yerba Labs states that, when you purchase this NFT, you own the underlying Bored Ape, the art completely. That's literally what it says, which you'd be like, oh, I own the art completely. But in fact, there's no transfer of copyright. And later on in that license, there's a commercial use term that says Yerba Labs grants you an unlimited, I'm reading the language now, an unlimited worldwide license to use, copy, and display the purchased art for the purpose of creating derivative works based upon the art. And then they define that as commercial use. So it's clear that they still own the copyright. And so for anyone looking to issue an NFT, there's something that I want to kind of back up here and just make sure that everyone understands a basic principle. And that's the difference between owning artwork and owning a copyright. And when you think about physical artwork, this is kind of obvious. I go into an art gallery, I buy a painting, I own that painting completely. I own that painting. Does that mean that I have the copyright in the underlying artwork and I have a right to make, copies and sell derivatives and sell t-shirts with that artwork on it? No, I've bought the actual artwork. I haven't bought the copyright to the artwork such that I can, jump in and exploit the whole bundle of rights that the copyright owner has. And that's a good analogy here, because while digital art and most of this artwork is digital. Like some isn't. Sometimes photographers out there may have like physical photographs and they want to turn it into an NFT. But when you're talking about digital art, there's this really interesting thing that, as the case law has developed, you can't, if you want to transfer ownership of a digital copy of art, right? It's hard to do that without making a copy, which is by definition of a copyright infringement if you don't have authorization to do that. If I have digital art, like just for the sake of argument, on a flash drive, and that's a copy of digital art that I own, and I sell you that flash drive, and you take the flash drive, and no copy's been made, I can sell you that digital copy. But otherwise, if I'm going to transfer a digital copy to you, if I'm going to email it to you, in fact, what's happening is a new copy is being made on your computer, and that, there's a whole case that went up to, there was a case, the Redigi case that went up. I think it was a Supreme Court case. And there's a company that said, we're going to try to solve this problem by simultaneously helping people facilitate the transfer of digital artwork by simultaneously creating a new work here and deleting it here, so there's never more than one copy. And the court said, no, you're violating copyright because you're making a copy. So if you speak to someone involved in the NFT industry that's really like a gung-ho advocate of this, and I know plenty of people who are, what they'll tell you is that yes, it's a license, but the reason why it's structured as a license instead of a transfer of copyright is because that license can then expressly give someone the ability to transfer that digital file in a way that you couldn't do with a copyright and sort of have it be legit so that the work is more easily transferable. But that's kind of one of the key things is like that in most cases, you don't own the artwork. And that's one of the first things to look at in the contract. And we'll discuss this a bit more in depth later, because this is actually really important stuff.
Can the photographer, once they've sold the license, in this case, the NFT, can they do whatever they want with that image still? Like, could they sell that has a photo print, not has an NFT, but can they do other things with that same image?
Yeah, so that completely depends on the terms of the license. If it's an exclusive use license, if it's is there a right to sub-license? Is there a right to merchandise? What rights? What does it say? And there are people who are very critical of NFTs and think that it's all illusory because in most cases, the licenses really are just silent to what the owner can do. And so if the purchaser of the NFT doesn't have any clear limitations on what the copyright owner can still do with the artwork, then what are they really getting? And this is just sort of one of the things to look at. And if I'm looking at a contract on behalf of someone looking to buy an NFT, I'm really concerned and I want to sort of make it clear what they can do with, what the owner can still do with the NFT to make sure that, as a buyer, there's exclusivity and really like know what your rights are and what they aren't. On behalf of photographers that may want to offer NFTs, sometimes the ambiguity works to their benefit because, you're selling the NFT and you may still be able to do pretty much whatever you want with your photograph. But I guess, Juliet, one thing to really be clear about is, again, this distinction between the artwork and the copyright, right? If you buy a painting, or photographers, if a photographer in a fine art gallery is selling a print as fine art, there's nothing that would prevent them from selling an unlimited number of other prints of that fine art. That's why sometimes numbered series have more value because you're creating that scarcity and that limitation. And if you're selling an NFT, there's something you said in your introductory remarks that that I want to be really clear about. The NFT is not the artwork. The NFT is a token that's basically a pointer. It points to something, that a copy of the artwork that you own. Okay, and unless the agreement says otherwise, just like selling a fine art print in a gallery, there's nothing to say, okay, you own that copy, but there's nothing to say that they can't make 1,000 other copies and sell them. And so that's what you really want to sort of be aware of as a buyer or as a seller to know that what you have a right to do. But that's all going to come down to the terms of the contract.
Does putting the NFT on a blockchain, is that considered having registered your copyright?
It's not. And actually, there's a couple of other things that before we move on, you asked me what to look out for in a contract, and I said 4 things. I think we've really only been discussing the first, which is whether you have a copyright, or really the first 2. The first is whether you have a copyright when you buy it or a license. The second is if you have a license, what's the scope of that license? What rights do you have? What rights does the owner still have? The third is, especially if you're the photographer selling this, and you mentioned this earlier, Juliet, one of the really great things about NFTs as a market for, selling artwork, to the extent it points to the underlying artwork that you own, is if that work gets resold, right, then the owner of the underlying copyright can get royalties. And that's a huge deal, right? Like there's, you've got artwork that, in the traditional, like real, in real life art market, artwork gets sold and it gets resold and resold and resold, and prices might go up. And we see auction prices on artwork of artists that are still living, where the art's selling for millions of dollars, and the artist doesn't see any of that. Whereas a percent of that under NFT contracts will often go back to the artist, and that's something as the artist you want to make sure is in your contract. That if your work, if you become the next Ansel Adams and people are buying NFTs for your work, that some of that you want some of that to come back to you. And then the 4th thing is, are the terms of the license, if it's assuming it's licensed, are those terms changeable? This has been a huge issue. This summer, there were 2 high-profile issuers who substantially altered the usage license for their NFTs. And everyone's sort of like all in an uproar, like, wait, you can't license it under these terms and then change it. And it's like, well, the contract specifically says we can. So, those have been sort of like, there's a lot of other stuff to look at, but those are sort of 4 of the big things.
Thank you. Joe, have you seen photographers asking to register an image that they were only selling as an NFT? Have they gone through you to do that?
Yeah, well, I mean, when photographers have approached us, the conversation is more about whether they should be selling their photos as NFTs. Registration, they're generally already doing, at least most of the ones that we work with, they're already registering the photos with the Copyright Office. And so when I speak with them, I'm just like, before you do anything, as for any situation, you should always register your work first. And then if you want to go into the process of minting NFTs of those photos, then at least you've got that side covered.
What challenges have you seen photographers run into with their NFTs?
Well, so we haven't worked directly with a lot of photographers yet who have taken the dive or the plunge. If I go back to, let's call it, late spring, summer 2021, we were getting calls every single day from our photographers saying, especially right after Beeple, right, for 69 million, like, hey, how do we make millions of dollars too? And so where I came down on it was, look, if you want to go and mint NFTs and sell your photos, that's fine. I wouldn't want to buy them because, but if you're going to sell them, but be sure to convert your crypto to fiat as fast as you can. But kind of if you really want to look at it, and Christina, I'm sure will speak to this with firsthand experience, but it really is an entirely different business. It's a different sales channel. It's a different market. The buyers are completely different from the folks you've been licensing photos to for however many years. And so you really have to treat it as a whole separate business unit. And so I think, the pitfalls that maybe a lot of photographers that just kind of want to stumble into it fall into is the fact that they think they can just go to OpenSea and set up an account and start minting their photos and sell them. But if you go to OpenSea, there's millions of NFTs. So how are they going to find you through the noise? And they find you because you treat it like a full business, and you market and you sell, and you get the word out. You do press releases around projects and so forth. And that's really how you do it. So I think the biggest thing to realize for photographers, at least from the conversations I've had with them over the past year or so, is it really is its own separate business. And if you're not willing or to invest the time to learn that business or have the resources and ability to bring in people to run that for you, then you're probably better off just focusing on what you already know.
Great, thank you. So Christina, can you tell us how much time did you spend doing research before you minted your first NFT?
I first was kind of being poked to take a look at the space around, like, I don't know, May and June, but I wasn't really open-minded enough to it. I think I was still just in my own space doing my thing. And then something kind of changed my perspective around August, September. And then, so September of last year, I kind of went full on, like, I think a lot of people that immediately enter, especially around that time when it was a bull market, there is a lot of just so much hype and so much, just a lot of energy. So you end up like in these Twitter spaces for, you know, they're like 12-hour Twitters or just like something ridiculous and these like crazy, it gets like very interesting. But I guess I was fortunate to be at the right place at the right time in terms of some communities coming together that formed. One primarily is Obscura DAO, and fellowship started from that. There's also Quantum, but there are these photographer communities that are comprised of fine artists, photojournalists, all types of photographers. And the two people that started that are amazing human beings that are photographers, and that just ended up having to basically create these organizations because everybody showed up and there was an interest. And so since then, you know, every single day I've just been, it's because it's a community now that you feel very connected to. I mean, I have taken a little bit of a break because I started working in it. I started writing. I helped launch the August Sonder 10K collection with fellowship that actually is currently in a lawsuit. So that's something interesting to discuss. But I've been trying to gather as much information that I can in terms of finding my moves and my, because I have really a lot of interest in film and moving image and motion as well as stills. And so I really want to just position myself in the right way for these next steps of this part of my career. And coming from a commercial point of view, I have been seeing brands enter the space, but the biggest thing that I've noticed photographers across the board, if you're coming at it from a fine art point of view, if you're coming at it from editorial or commercial point of view, is that there are case studies, there is proven facts just showing us how if you can remove the bureaucracy of, you know, getting grant distribution, and just things can happen a lot faster without a middleman. And to me, that's what's really exciting about the future of NFTs and Web3 for photographers, is that we can be our own stewards. We have, you know, sovereignty. We, you know, is it removing the agent? You know, not necessarily. I mean, there are people that want to be on Twitter spaces talking about their artwork all day, and like, good on them. I think most artists want to be doing their art, practicing it, learning, growing, which is what I want to do. So I think there's still space and how it develops with finding specific agents and galleries that are open to this space and that do want to move into the space, and even in the commercial sense as well. But one example I'll mention really quick, well, there's two examples that Obscura did that I can share with you, just in terms of how you can kind of get funding, distribute it really quickly, and kind of start making history and start having like a case study for what is the power of the blockchain. And Obscura is this organization, you know, it started really on Discord, which is a very dangerous place that I will mention. It's basically like, don't click on any spam link and then your wallet will be drained. So that is a real threat. But that is basically the same thing as phishing in your email. So it's like bringing all of that information and applying it to this new space is really important. But back in October, they got a grant of $100,000 that they chose to distribute to 100 different photographers. Each got $1,000. you know, or whatever that was in ETH at the time. And their assignment was to document 10 different portraits of NFT photographers or people in the NFT space to create a larger collection that's almost kind of like a timestamp, like almost kind of documenting this is 100 different portraits of people that are in this space at this time right now. And then what Obscura did was they, as a collective, so they, I mean, obviously it's that rate is like not a great rate, but it's just like, this is like, we're figuring things out. So after that, the work was curated down to 100 images that Obscura chose to launch a collection on Foundation and sell that, where part of the proceeds goes to Obscura, part of the proceeds goes to the artist. And it's all of that you can track, you know, it's written into the contract, how things are split. And so not only do these artists get paid once for the initial like labor, but then they're getting paid for the selling of their own work on behalf of Obscura, and then the royalties following that. You know, secondary market sales are not like crazy in a bear market, but just the idea that the format is there is really exciting, because you can continue to get paid for a project, and it's sort of, you know, the provenance and all of that. So I think, sorry, so going back to how did I get started? When did I start? Primarily September, October. I met a lot of different people. There's a group called NF Tuesdays. There's Quantum that has launched some really big name photographers from, you know, the fine art and commercial world, and that they happen to be in Los Angeles. They just opened up a space, an IRL space in Santa Monica. So I've just been following everybody's journey and really trying to understand the market dynamics, and trying to just, you know, create a plan for myself, really studying the collectors and how people collect. And it's a whole new world for me, because I never really thought this would be a path. So I think it's exciting.
How many have you minted?
So I've minted personally, actually just 3. I've really been very careful about not wanting to saturate the market. And I have a lot of mixed feelings about artists that do editioned work, which is very popular on Tezos platforms, versus an OpenSea. You can have editioned work versus one-of-ones, but I still have trouble with that. Just my own perception of, if you have a one-of-one and it's an NFT one-of-one, then it's very clear that provenance, and it is also with the edition pieces, but I'm sort of trying to figure out my standard, because I think that's what artists owe for their collectors or for their audience. They can't keep like changing their terms around and changing the editions and saying, I'm gonna give away these prints, although I already sold an edition print of this, and then now I'm selling this one-of-one and I'm also giving away prints. I think there has to be standards to uphold, so that there's a respectful relationship between the microeconomy that you're growing. So I've just been very conscious of that, and I don't really want to like over mint things. So I have a couple different projects in the works that I'm focusing on. And then I actually had this massive project where I had to create 100 images for Obscura for the world today. That was a collective project that I just wrapped up in April, which is a collection on OpenSea under Obscura's token address, under their contract. So it doesn't appear under my name, but it was basically a commission through Obscura.
And have you had different contracts, or has it been a consistent contract? Have you had an attorney look at your contracts? How have you dealt with the contracts?
Well, I mean, now, it basically what is the wild, wild west every single day, but every day feels like there's such a massive improvement. And for me, I mean, it's basically what I know of. I'm sure there's many others, but Manifold Studio is a really big proponent of excellent, like for a photographer to handle having a contract that will go cross marketplaces and be able to really manipulate that contract as much as they can. So there is a lot of like custom contract, trying to make it as approachable as possible for artists to do it correctly. And so everyone that I know and a lot of friends of mine always recommend Manifold Studio, because at first they weren't charging anything and they just really wanted artists to take, this into their own hands, as opposed to like using the Foundation basic contract of the marketplace, but that has already changed. Like a lot of, since I kind of started looking into this space, it's already been like a year, but the marketplaces have, they used to have like the standard contract. And now if you're a little bit more savvy, you just always make your own contract with, you know, your ASCII art, which is like your own signature, basically, that would prove that like this is an original and that nobody would, yeah, but I could keep going.
And is your audience there completely different? Are you finding overlap in the audience that you have as a commercial photographer being interested in an NFT, or the collectors there being interested in your real world photography?
I've been kind of studying a few different photographers that I know have their foot in both worlds and maybe always have. And so it's a really natural progression. I haven't really seen straight commercial photographers that don't have a fine art presence. I haven't seen like the transaction, like brands are more going into the metaverse, not necessarily partnering with artists that I've seen yet. But I mean, there's larger partnerships going on with like big name artists, but in terms of like the day-to-day of what I see, I don't know if I'm like dropping names, but yeah, and we've just talked about some people, but like Carlo Van Der Rohe is one commercial photographer that also has invented a lot of his like plate light technology. And he's been doing really well because he kind of has always existed in his own space between both commercial and fine art world. And he's been doing really well. And I've been watching him progress. And Ruben Wu, who, you know, works for National Geographic and was like the perfect kind of example of somebody that would have, this is just kind of like the perfect platform for him, where he had a lot of moving image work that couldn't really live anywhere. And so those are two examples of people that are, you know, editorial or commercial photographers that also are selling in a fine art capacity on these marketplaces that I've seen doing really well. I guess, did that answer your question?
Yeah, absolutely. So there's a question for Stephen. Are you seeing contracts for photographers who have to include for their commercial client, that their commercial client might want to make it an NFT at some point? I mean, I don't know, maybe it's too new that this isn't happening so often yet.
I wish I had a better answer, but I personally have not seen that at this point in agreements.
And if they're doing it work for hire, so obviously then the brand can do whatever they want, which they wouldn't normally be signing, but sometimes perhaps for the NBA, I imagine that maybe those contracts those photographers may not be getting anything on the sale of those imageries. But if somebody was to take a photograph that you did for a brand, let's say, and then they made an NFT, and you saw that as a photographer, it's like, wait, hey, they used my photograph. Where would they even begin the process? Who's liable? What would they do?
Yeah, so I mean, let me start by just clarifying my last answer, which is I haven't seen anything in contracts specific to NFTs, but you know, and I think you just alluded to this, that often the contracts will either say this is a full buyout of all rights, or ask for a transfer of ownership, or just have unlimited use in any medium, you know, now existing or in the future known. And you know, some of that language would certainly cover the ability to use it as an NFT. Getting to the question that you just asked, I think you're saying, are you saying if a photographer sees the use of their photograph in an NFT that they did not authorize? Is that what you're saying?
Right, yes.
Okay. And we actually saw that for one of our clients. There was going to be an NFT offering, and the ad for it used our client's photograph, and we thought the NFT was going to be of our client's photograph. And we, of course, sent the cease and desist letter, and they're like, no, it's not. We're not using the photograph for the NFT. I'm like, oh, so you're just using it without authorization in a photograph to market the NFT that you're trying to auction off. You know, and it's basically infringement like anything else. If it's an unauthorized use of someone's image, it's an unauthorized use of someone's image.
And the usage of, if somebody's bought an NFT, normally they can then put it on their own social media. I bought this, right? So I can show it on my social media. Can other people show other NFTs that are not theirs on social media?
Yeah, so this question can get a little bit tricky because it really ends up being very similar to any other copyright analysis, where you're going to look at the scope of the license, and then beyond that, you're going to look at fair use. I mean, is it fair use to say, I bought this NFT, or so-and-so bought this NFT, and like a celebrity? Like sometimes these things become newsworthy and you'd have the ability for a third party to claim fair use. Other times, it's just eye candy that would require a license, and it's really not that different from the way you would look at any other use of an image.
We've talked a bit about Web3, and Joe, you had said earlier that you'd be willing to explain Web3.
Yeah, I mean, so that's definitely, you hear that all the time. To understand Web3, you got to look back at what's Web 1 and Web 2. Web 1, think back to the mid 90s, where basically you're dialing up on Prodigy or AOL, and you're basically going, oh, look, a stock price or the weather, you know, and so it's basically read only. You can go and you can search for information, you can read, and that's all you can do. And then in the late 90s into the early 2000s, that's when it really evolved into Web 2.0, where it was read and write. So now you can have user-generated content, and you could upload photos to a website, as crazy as that idea is. So, and then of course that evolved into full-blown social media, where everybody's exchanging information, ideas, files, data, etc. What's specific to Web 1 and 2 that changes with Web 3 is that Web 1 and 2, the internet, the infrastructure of the internet is around centralized servers. So you've got data sitting on a server that's run by a company or a person or a government, etc. But it's all these controlled servers. Web 3 is built on blockchains, so distributed ledgers. And so the first, big successful application to run in Web 3, of course, would be like Bitcoin. And then if you fast forward, kind of the more recent success story of the Web 3 application is what we're talking about here today, which is NFTs, where basically an NFT is a token that shows or establishes digital asset rights. And you can use that to help drive an economy within a Web 3.0 enabled environment like a metaverse. And so that's really what we're talking about when we're saying Web 3.
Christina, I wanted to ask you about writing and storytelling. How important is what you put in with your NFT about the piece or that whole part of creating one?
Yeah, well, actually also maybe wanted to just yes and Joe's response really quick too, just to like underscore that I think like decentralization is like a key word as well, because on top of everything that he said, which was like spot on, I do think there's a philosophical point of view that is very interesting and compelling, because the idea that we've been selling our data in Web 2, and we actually have been secretly like the slaves to the Facebooks and the Instagrams of the world. And so we're just giving away all of our data, they're mining it, and they're shifting our worldviews with their algorithms, which is obviously also happening on Twitter. So there's these like larger ideas about how Web3 being decentralized, there's decentralized social media platforms being developed where you own your own identity. And that's the idea that you are the ownership, which is exciting and very scary at the same time, because if everybody's in charge of themselves, then can we make it? I don't know. But anyway, okay, sorry. And going back to your question about the storytelling point of view, I think that's what I've seen shift in the conversations I've seen between artists and collectors that you never would have been able to see before ever, because there wasn't like a Twitter thread of somebody explaining their process, and that there is such a massive appreciation for work and people that have done well in the space. And there is, money out there that's wanting to support somebody. So it's really interesting to witness how, if you put yourself out there as an artist and you do fully commit to, your story, your brand story, but really like your artist story, somebody's going to connect with that and they're going to invest in you. And, it's just at the right price depending on who you're targeting. So I've seen just so many conversations that's just so cool to really witness, these collectors connecting with people's stories and then wanting to support and acquire their work and follow them. And so I do think it's really important to write something concise, but also something very, basically your artist statement. I mean, I think it's really important when you are selling your artwork on any of these platforms that you do take what you're putting on there very seriously, because it's going to be minted on the blockchain forever, like posthumously. So like, that's the hope, is like, you won't be here, that will be there telling your story. So that's also a really interesting way to think about it.
Do people have to keep adjusting their pricing of their products based on the fluctuation of the cryptocurrency?
There's some interesting rules of thought here, and primarily, you know, the maxis, the ETH maxis or Bitcoin maxis, but a lot of people that are in the space feel like you should treat ETH as the dollar, and it would look bad if you were constantly moving your price around based on the price of ETH. So because if you commit to buying low, then eventually it will go higher. If you buy ETH high, then maybe you buy a piece and ETH is high, then so there is an element to the game, the gamified part of this economy that I think is really interesting, because you can sell for 1 ETH today, but if in 6 months it's so much more, and you list it at the same price in fiat, you're actually still making a profit. So the rule of thumb from the artists that I've been surrounding myself with is that don't change it for the volatility, but you do have to come up with a pricing structure that suits you. And if you're overpriced, like I do believe I probably was, because I've really, now I understand a lot more about what sells well and what is a good price point to be competitive with. And it's not, it's not like collectors, like these are crypto collectors. They're not, I mean, there are a lot more fine art collectors entering the space, I think, but so pricing your work is like a whole strategy that I think everyone could go down their own, rabbit hole with, but there is definitely a sweet spot. So yeah.
Going back to registration of your copyright, Stephen, if somebody they put an NFT, they've minted it, and then they realize, oh, I never did copyright it, register it with Copyright Office. Would it be considered published now that has an NFT? If that's the only place it's been seen, would you consider that a published piece?
So it's a really interesting question. Because remember that what you register with the Copyright Office is the underlying work. And as we discussed before, the underlying work is not the NFT. The NFT is a token that points to the underlying work. So I'm not aware of any case to decide this. At some point, a judge is going to have to decide whether, or the Copyright Office maybe speak to whether selling, and normally when you sell a work, when you offer work for sale, that constitutes publication. Most likely when you sell the NFT that points to the work, that would count as publication of the work. Although I'm just trying to think, it's an interesting question. I'm trying to think about whether it's possible that you have an unpublished work that you sell a pointer to that doesn't constitute publishing the work. And it's a really interesting question, but most likely it would be considered published.
Not that this is ever a question anyway, is it published or unpublished?
Yeah, fortunately we won a case at the US Supreme Court where they said if you make an error on your registration and it's an error, a good faith error, it shouldn't invalidate your registration. But yeah, but definitely register your work, especially once you're out there, on the blockchain. If it's a successful launch and people see the work, there's a reasonable chance that it's going to be reproduced by the unscrupulous, and that registration is going to get you statutory damages and attorney's fees, and maybe the only way that it actually makes financial sense to prosecute the claim.
Do any of you have questions for each other, having listened to each other?
Now, there is one other thing I wanted to throw into the mix, and I don't really speak to the marketing side of it at all, but I really think it's important to make sure that anyone listening here is aware that there is a discussion inside the SEC as to whether or not NFTs are securities. And the way that you market them as a, if it's investment, like I'm actually aware of one of our clients that the SEC is currently inquiring into and potentially going to bring an action for SEC violations, for securities and exchange violations, relating to the way that the NFT was offered and investors were solicited. It's something to be aware of and something to educate yourself on, depending on how. I don't think they should be deemed securities. I think that ultimately, I think the SEC has the more questionable position, but it could affect a lot of people that want to get into the space. And it's just really, it's outside of the scope of the discussion here today, but I really just want to kind of drop that in so people are aware that that's an issue to look into.
So I actually have a question for you, Stephen. So I don't know if you've seen OpenAI, or not OpenAI, OpenSea's policy on NFT theft. So they were getting bashed because they were going after innocent buyers of fraudulent NFTs. And so they swung their pendulum all the way to the other direction. And now basically, if you have a claim that somebody has stolen your work and sold it as an NFT, you actually have to file a police report. And then when you submit your notice to OpenSea, you have to have the police report with it. And it's their way to combat fraudulent takedown notices. So, as bad as DMCA takedown notices are and what a pain they are, this is like a million times worse, not to mention it from the perspective of the police department. I mean, they don't know what you're talking about. So I don't know if you've run into that, because we are starting to find our photographers' photos being minted and sold on some of these platforms. And the prospect of having to go through that process, it's not pretty.
Yeah, I hadn't heard about that. I mean, I wonder if the platforms are claiming DMCA protection. If they're claiming DMCA protection, then there's clear protocols about what they need to do to not be liable for, for infringements. Although I suppose they don't keep the content on the platform ongoingly after the sale. I don't know. It's an interesting issue.
Yeah.
Okay, I'll open it up. If anybody wants to send us a question, I'm also going to put in the code for if you're interested in joining APA, if you're not already a member and you'd like to join, I'm offering a $20 coupon to get you started with your membership. So that's the code you would put in. No, that's not the code. She's sorry. That's the code. See, just testing, seeing if you're paying attention. Okay, and then if anybody had any question they wanted to throw in the chat. Otherwise, I want to thank everybody for being here. I want to really thank our panelists, Kristyna Archer, Stephen Doneger, Joe Naylor. If you have questions you want to send to us later, and we will look at doing more webinars on this. Also, if you're a member and you want to host something, let me know, because this is always about photographers talking to photographers and to the community at large to get information that can help us all succeed. So thank you. Oh, let me see. The link. Oh, the link did not show up in the chat. Oh, that's. Oh, right. Sorry. Duh. Thank you for that. There we go. See, that's what happens when you're your technical staff and the moderator at the same time. We need more people to help us here. Okay, so thank you, everybody. Thank you for being here today. Follow apanational.org. We have a lot of really great events. There's some events happening tomorrow night, next week. There's competitions going on listed on our website right now. Some really great things happening. So really appreciate everybody's support and participation. Thank you for those who are here today. I appreciate it. And we'll see you soon.